Roscoff has been my most favorite map to work on so far, partly because I'm an Age of Sail nerd, but also because I love the idea for the map. It's quite a unique map compared to most of the other objective maps, and it has plenty of objectives that I like to script, especially the ship. I don't think the map came out totally how we wished, especially in the difficulty department, since we have heavy asymmetry between our QA testers and the average skill level of most G&B players. But I do think the map delivered on a lot of our desires far more than plenty of the other maps. Nothing in game development ever comes out completely how you hoped, but trade-offs and concessions are a must if you want to release on time and fit playtest feedback. The concept of Roscoff goes back about a year from its release date, around the end of Cobb's development. The earliest date that I can find for the concept in written form is from Christmas Eve of 2023. And interestingly, the idea of having Jean die is present in the post. I can't find any screenshots or posts from the time regarding this, but I do distinctly remember during a call between the developers way before, where we had this silly idea for an NPC scene. It involved the players coming to an area where a raised house is the focus, and the players can see an NPC through a window. The NPC would then have to wave to the players and then get tackled by a runner out of the window. This is then where the whole idea of carrying the diplomat's body came from. The dock was the first place that was built, and I have a screenshot of it from January 3rd of 2024. At the time, we wanted the first objective to be tasking the players with bringing the ship into the harbor and docking it. So I had a conversation with a guy I know who actually sails tall ships in real life, and he suggested that in ideal conditions, the ship could come in at a beam reach, which means the wind is blowing from the side of the ship. This objective seemed too complicated for players to figure out on just text alone, so it was cut. Though I did later use the same concepts for when the players attempt to leave the harbor. As far as I can recall, the first thing I started scripting for the map was the NPC, which I had actually started development on before the bots and the Alamo update. The NPC really worried me because I wasn't sure how I could create one that wasn't incredibly stupid and therefore frustrate the players by him constantly dying due to no fault of their own. So he needed to have pretty good zombie avoidance, and I think I did pretty well at this, though frustrated G&B players would likely disagree. The NPC avoids zombies by constantly measuring their distance from him, and if a zombie enters a certain radius, he will then transition to the zombie evade state. Here the NPC averages out all close by zombie positions and gets a unit vector pointing towards the average position, and then flips it so that he'll run away from them. The NPC has some obstacle avoidance code that is a bit faulty, but basically he sends a sphere cast out in the direction he is attempting to move, and if it hits a wall, it will then project his move vector along the plane and use that as his new movement vector to avoid bumping into walls. The NPC also has a follow state. At the time, all the NPC would do is pick the closest player to him and then follow them by moving when too far, and then stopping within a certain distance so that he didn't walk into the player. If the NPC didn't have direct line of sight to the player he was following, he would use Roblox pathfinding to get to them. This is where the NPC sat for several months without any further development because of the Halloween update. When I picked up the NPC again during the focused development of Roscoff around November, I reworked how we traverse the map. I used a plugin written by Tridge77 to place a node graph throughout Roscoff, starting from the house where the players meet Mr. Crawford all the way up to the ship. A node graph is a data structure that stores positions called nodes, and links which connect the nodes into a graph. The graph is then used to calculate a number of things, chiefly pathfinding. A reason since Crawford was to travel along a set path and not deviate too far from this path, a node graph would be better than relying on Roblox's pathfinding service. Similar to Left Eye's navigation mesh system, I wrote an escape path data structure that would calculate the most direct path through the map along the node graph, and then use that to calculate each node's flow distance. The flow distance of a node is its distance to the end of the map, so the first node at the start of the map would have the highest flow distance and the final node would be at 0. This distance is not calculated linearly, and it is instead calculated using pathfinding to find each node's path to the end and then sum up all the lengths of each link in the path. While following the players, instead of directly following one player, the NPC will find the player who is the closest to the end of the map by taking their flow distance along the node graph, and the player with the lowest flow distance is the closest to the end. The NPC then gets all players within a certain radius of that player and averages out their positions so that he follows the group, and tries to surround himself so that he will be less likely to take the brunt of the oncoming zombies. This system is also done to reduce griefing. If he were to follow the closest player to him at all times, then a bad actor could intentionally lead him into danger or backwards into the map. If a player attempts this, he will not follow them. Similarly, he will discount players who are far away from the escape path. The NPC can be told by the game to go to a specific spot. This is called a hiding spot. In this state, he will not follow players, minimally avoid zombies because they are told to ignore him, and he will stop when he reaches the desired location. This system is used for scripted sequences, such as the Barricade explosion objective in the finale. The NPC also reacts to being grabbed by zombies, in the same way that players do. But to reduce my workload and to reduce the headaches of players, only shamblers can attack him, and bombers can hurt him, but they do not seek him out. The NPC has some stuck detection. If he somehow clips through a wall or gets stuck on map geometry, he will detect that he's not making his movement goal after a few retries and teleport to the nearest node. Lastly, when the NPC dies, it will spawn a ragdoll. Related to the NPC but not actually part of the same code, the NPC's body does two things. First, it allows players to pick it up by attaching the body to them when they press the interaction button, and playing the according animations to make it appear as if it's being held. Secondly, the NPC body monitors for griefing using the same escape path data structure that the NPC uses. The body will track its progress towards the end. If the player carrying the body starts backtracking, it will force the player to drop the body. If the body goes too far away from the escape path, it will force the player to drop it. If the body goes really far away from the escape path, it will be teleported to the nearest node along the escape path. If the body gets deleted somehow, either by clipping through the map or some physics glitch, the game detects that and spawns a new one at the nearest node. When a body enters a designated area, like the one on the ship in the finale, it will force the player to drop it and won't allow anybody to pick it up again.
Previous explosion spectacles, such as the one in Roscoff, were typically achieved in one of two ways, either by deleting the model and covering the area with fire and dust particles, or by physically simulating the explosion within the engine. However, neither of these methods was chosen for this barricade. Simply having the barricade disappear when the gunpowder ignited would look unconvincing, and physically simulating all the parts would be resource-intensive and prone to flinging issues. Instead, the barricade was prepared using Blender's cell fracture modifier to split the stakes into individual pieces. These fractured pieces were imported into Roblox, where the model was set up within a segment of the map, and an explosion simulation was performed. A custom script was then written to record the position and rotation of each piece of the wall for every physics step, saving the data to a keyframe sequence. Using this data, the script constructed the pieces into a Roblox animation rig, allowing the explosion simulation to be played back as an animation track. This technique, known as animation baking, delivered the desired visual effect without the performance drawbacks of running a live physics simulation.
Some G&B players may notice that every ship model so far in this game does not move with the water it is floating in. This can be jarring visually because we are used to ships heeling over and rocking about in ocean waves. This was especially noticeable in Roscoff for the USS Constitution sitting at the dock. In order to make the ship look more realistic, I added the effect of it heeling from the ocean waves. It's a sick joke that Roblox has no way to sample the height of terrain water waves at a given point, so I had to use an approximation to do this. The ship samples 4 points, one on the bow, one on the stern, one on the starboard side, and the last on larboard side. It then averages this out to gain the desired rotation of the keel. This simple effect definitely makes the ship look a lot more believable, and the sounds of the ship in the water complement it well. This effect was extremely annoying to program because I had to do it on the Kleine in order to not overload network traffic, and this disconnect between where the client is standing on the ship versus where the server sees the ship would cause the anti-cheat to go crazy and often kill the player or teleport them under the ship. Zombies also had trouble catching players because of this as well. The effect is turned off when the ship starts moving because it caused so many issues that I didn't want to deal with the headache.
For the finale, we wanted players to actually cast off the ship and set sail in order to push out to sea. For whatever reason, I got myself obsessed with the sail and making the process of setting it realistic. Most Roblox games don't bother with this, and for good reason. It takes a lot of effort to actually set a sail in real life, so to demand that of the players every single time they want to set sail in a video game, it would just be unfun. But the length of this process to draw out the finale seemed merited. Originally, I planned for players to climb the ratlines and foot ropes to untie each gasket along the topsail, and then unfurl it by easing the clue lines and bunt lines. But this was cut to reduce the amount of complexity for players because zombies had trouble attacking players who were on top of the foot ropes. The topsail mesh and animation went through many iterations. The first thing I tried was a simple plane with only 4 vertices and a bone on each vertex. These bones were then moved around in Roblox to fit the sail to the top yard and to simulate the clues being sheeted, and then the sail getting stretched out when hauling the halyard. This approach was okay, but the sail had no bending and looked like a sheet of paper, not a sail. The next thing I tried was simulating cloth physics in Blender. It took a while to get the simulation to look believable. After many tries, I scrapped this because there was no chance of being able to export the result so that it could be imported into Roblox. If Roblox supported shape keys, then this system might be semi-possible. Another thing I tried was creating an armature that deformed the sail mesh, and then manually animating the sail unfurling, being sheeted, and hauled up. In Blender, the results looked okay, but I was never ever satisfied. Once imported into Roblox though, the mesh deformation wouldn't act the same way, and I believe this is because Roblox does not support bone scaling. It would end up looking like a giant diaper instead of a sail. The final method I went with was utterly obvious to me after asking the Mark of War devs how they animated the sails for their game. I created a sail mesh, subdivided it a few times, and then created a bone assigned to each vertex in the mesh. This allowed fine-tuned control to the whole mesh without having to deal with scaling issues. I animated each bone to look like a sail being sheeted and hauled up, and then imported it into Roblox, and it looked like it just had in Blender. In the game world, when a sail is set, the wind blows against the front of the sail, and therefore pushes the ship back. Ultimately, I think I wasted a bunch of time on this because it's an effect that not many people pay attention to, especially with the zombies on the ship coupled with the heavy fog.
Started brainstorming for Roscoff. I originally envisioned a French map on the northern coast. I wasn't certain of any location or battle. This was right after the development of Cobb had wrapped up, and at this time the only map not tied to a real-life battle was Varda's Fortress. A fun piece of trivia is Varda was picked because I googled the most northern fortress in the world. Back then I didn't follow any lore or real-life battles, so that explains why a lot of these earlier maps had a wide range of nations that had no business being there. One of the original concepts I came up with was a map involving the Vendée rebels, or one of the various rebellions against the revolution. One of the most outlandish ideas I had at the time was a Francois de Charette zombie rising out of his grave, kind of like John Marston in Undead Nightmare, to enact revenge on all those revolutionary zombies. However, tonally and religiously this feels very disrespectful, and it also raised some pretty large questions about the lore. Eventually I scrapped the idea of involving the rebels since I'd have to shoehorn in long since dispersed groups into the lore. These ideas never really even made it out of my head. Remnants of this idea can be seen in the old chapel and the Sacred Heart marking in the crypt though. When searching for the map location, I looked around northern France looking for interesting layouts and architecture. When researching GB maps, I'll try to tend to look for cities with preserved buildings. A lot of time European cities have had their buildings or just the facade entirely changed since the time of Napoleon. Roscoff seems pretty Napoleonic to me, however, I'm sure some eyes would disagree. St. Malo and Cherbourg, France were originally considered, but I settled on Roscoff. I didn't want the map to be another dry French versus the zombies map, so I tried to look for ways we could implement new nations into the map. I settled on America because Nuber and I are full-blooded patriotic citizens, and I wanted to get more out of the US Marine model. Also, we had and still have plans to utilize the USS Constitution. I know that adding Americans to the game kind of upset a certain crowd, especially in a canon map, but it's a game about zombies, and I wanted to have a little fun. I think their presence is explained is pretty solid at least, although I can admit the British are a little bit shoehorned in. But their presence is part of a much more overarching plot I've got in my head. Just a few people have caught on. I'm also sure some of you may have caught on that the safe house in game is based off one of the houses in the Duel list. I've seen some depictions from the time of just similar towns. I think Roscoff probably looks a little bit too clean for the time period. It probably should have looked a little more poorer, but I think it's still acceptable. The concept for returning to the ship was inspired by Left 4 Dead 2's Hard Rain. However, several key things were changed. For one, I don't think players would really enjoy backtracking. And second of all, we had to come up with an idea for what the players had to retrieve. We ended up with a diplomat. A pretty bad issue we ran into was making the map feel unique. There's so many objective maps in the game, to the point it's getting hard to come up with unique visuals, concepts, and ideas. The time frame the game is set in also makes it very difficult with its limiting technology. A lot of objectives and maps are pretty much reskins of ones from other maps, but in return we tried to pack a map full of narratives and set pieces. I think the level design turned out alright. The log barricade at the start wasn't intended to be a bottleneck for the players, but the spawning system turned it into one. It's shaky, but I like how it plays out. The church section turned out well. Without sappers, the zombies get up and close and create a chaotic and frantic environment. A piece of cut content is the bell guy. At first, you're going to be able to climb up a house during the horde event. At the top of this house would be a window with a vantage point to shoot him and stop the horde. I talked it out and decided it would be too stressful and too hard for the players to understand. The church was intended to be the midpoint for the map, a safe zone to gather bearings. Untying the soldiers was originally supposed to slow down the players and allow them to breathe a sigh of release. But GB players and their unwavering force to push forward crushed this idea. The gunpowder objective was added to split up teams and slow players down. It works a little too well sometimes, and I find it to be a bottleneck for servers. Initially it was much worse, with 2 times the amount of zombies, and QA testers could barely beat it. The final stretch of the map isn't much to note about. I had to make the geometry pretty simple to allow the NPC to traverse the map easily. Our first finale playtests were pretty lackluster. The objectives were interesting, but it felt more akin to Vardahouse Fortress, just holding a dock. You'd set sail and you'd be home free. Recycled the zombies climbing the boat mechanic from Copenhagen to spice things up for people on the capstan. The idea to have zombies below deck tried to address the dryness of the finale as well. I wish we would have fleshed out the idea of more of a crew being down there, maybe an NPC or distant gunfire and screams. But all that's left in game now is the music at the beginning and a couple of corpses. Maybe we'll revisit it and flesh it out someday. In playtest, I enjoyed the frantic chaos that happened once the zombies rose from below deck, although it did add an unreasonable amount of difficulty, and I could see some people feeling like it drags on. Finally, I should mention it looks very grim for whatever is left of the crew, and whatever shaky French, Anglo, and American alliance is left.
Scotland forever!